When you lose a job or you feel stuck in a career that no longer fits, advice usually sounds very practical. You have to update your resume, you have to do more network, learn a new skill. All of that matters, but it doesn't answer a deeper question that many of my listeners should be asking. How do I stay sane, hopeful, and kind to myself and to others during this time of transition? My guest today has spent more than 4 decades studying that deeper layer. Dr. Stephen G. Post is one of the world's leading scholars on altruism, compassion, and the science of giving. He is the professor of preventative medicine and the director of the Center of Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at the Renaissance School of Medicine at Stony Brook University in New York. Before that, he was the professor of bioethics at Case Western University. If you know me, you know that this is where I want to do my further studies one day, fingers crossed. He also served as the editor-in-chief of the 5-volume Encyclopedia of Bioethics, a foundational reference in the field. Stephen is the founding president of the Institute for Research of Unlimited Love, originally funded by Sir John Templeton to explore altruism, compassion, and service through rigorous science. He has written numerous books, including 2 books on Alzheimer's disease, but you might be more familiar with his book, Why Good Things Happen to Good People. In this book, he pulled together a body of research showing that giving and kindness are not just nice to have qualities, they are linked to better health, longer life, and greater happiness. Stephen has a new book. It's called Pure Unlimited Love: Science and the 7 Paths to Inner Peace. And it has a foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it takes this work even further. It lays out 7 practical paths for cultivating inner peace in the middle of conflict, uncertainty, and fear, and yes, job search too. There's a link to it in the show notes of this episode, and I think it's a wonderful Christmas present for you to give to a loved one or to give it to yourself. In this conversation, we talk about what pure unlimited love actually means in real life and why kindness and generosity helps us stay grounded during unemployment and career changes. How to keep your heart open without becoming a doormat, and how to follow your callings even when the job market feels brutal. If you are in a season of job loss, reinvention, quiet frustration with your work, this episode is for you. My hope is that you walk away from it with a more spacious view of your own life and a few daily practices that help you find peace even when the future is uncertain. Let's hear it from Stephen. Hi, I'm Renata Bernardi, and this is the Job Hunting Podcast, where I interview experts and professionals and discuss issues that are important for job hunters and those who are working to advance their careers. So make sure that you subscribe and follow, and let's dive right in. Stephen, you're an expert in this. When you look at the world right now, I'm talking the world according to my listeners. We see layoffs. We see people being burnt out at work, not loving what they do. Does that worry you?
It is a perennial human challenge that seems particularly pointed these days. But the solution doesn't change. The solution is that we need to find our callings in life and stick with them, not be diverted by a little more prestige or a little more income. You need to stick with the things that feel true to you, that allow you to give and glow and not just fit in. I think that's part of the problem, is that our educational system educates people to fit in smoothly. But in that process, they oftentimes repress their greatest talents, their greatest dreams. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. So the world needs dreamers. And I have been dreaming all of my life, and I'm not stopping now.
Stephen, this I 100% resonate with what you're saying. I'm a believer in that as well. When we're talking about that big dream and a purposeful lifestyle, when we're talking about love, you talk about pure, unlimited love.
Mhm.
Is that, however, a stage in life that is that one can pursue once one has dealt with the survival mode that they might be in if they lost their jobs?
I don't think so. I think that, in fact, from our studies, at least of adult Americans, we did a study in early 2010, and this was after the 2009 financial collapse. And what we found was that 41% of American adults were volunteering, which is a
Hmm.
high percentage. How much were they volunteering? On average, about 100 hours a year. And if you break that down, it would be a couple of hours a week.
Okay.
And then we asked questions. This is in the book. We asked questions of them, which were more in the direction of positive psychology. So many of them who had lost their jobs said that they found great meaning in what they were doing, that volunteering made them better able to cope with disappointments and setbacks. Uh, it improved their emotional health, 77%. 68% volunteering made me feel physically healthier. 92% they felt an enriched purpose in life. 89% agreed that volunteering improved my sense of well being. 73% said it lowered my stress levels. So that's pretty good. They also said it helped them sleep better. They were happier. So I don't think you ever get into a situation in life where love, in the more profound sense that I speak of it, not the love of chocolate, although I was eating some chocolate this afternoon, not the love of designer jeans, but something much more fundamental. I like to say when the well being and the security of another is as real to you as your own, and sometimes more so, you love that person. And that can be expressed in many, many ways on the job or off the job, depending on what people around you need. So sometimes it can be expressed as carefrontation. It's a word in my book, which I have borrowed from Scott Peck, a great psychiatrist and a friend of mine. Compassion, helping others, creativity. There's no end to the ways in which you can express love. And it's these expressions of love that make life meaningful and that make people successful. So that really is always the case, no matter whether you have secure employment, which I must say I do because I'm a tenured professor, although you never know. But I think that it's always the case for me that there are going to be low points. Every once in a while, this job, even though I love it, it does get boring. And I say, thank God it's Friday, which is never a good sign.
Yeah.
But love is always the answer. And whether you're employed or not employed, it's the answer. And you can make tremendous strides with it. Sometimes losing a job is a good thing.
Stephen, take me back to that moment in your life where you first became interested in compassion, in altruism. What happened in your life that pulled you in that direction?
Well, I wasn't being excoriated by some brutal beast. I had a fairly normal childhood. But I was lucky enough when I was in high school up in New Hampshire at a prep school to discover that what I really liked was not ice hockey, but rather tutoring French Canadian kids from the poor neighborhoods. This is all south of Canada. And that made me very fulfilled. And I knew fairly early on that what I probably wanted to do with my life was to become a great scholar and a great teacher. And I stuck with that. Now, there were some interruptions here and there, and I had to be innovative. I had to persevere. And there are some origin stories in all of this. But yeah, I think you have to stick with your callings. Sometimes to find your callings, you have to experiment. We do a lot of volunteering here in this medical school. We have probably at any point in time 400 or 500 volunteers, and they come in. These can be high school kids, these can be middle-aged people without a job, these can be older adults. They come in, they get a book. It's about 200 pictures in this book, and it gives them a choice of what their activities might be. Maybe some of them want to work in the gift shop. Maybe some of them want to work in preventive medicine or family medicine or population health in some way, shape, or form. Maybe some of them want to garden. We have all kinds of options, but we let people have their choice when they volunteer. And then precisely what they do, some of them want to do exactly what they were always doing because they feel more confident with that. And others would prefer to be innovative and do something they've never done before. It's important to gather these people together periodically, even at the end of every day if it's possible, and let them debrief about what they found meaningful in the day. That really makes a difference. And what we know is that volunteering helps them live healthier, happier, and even longer lives. So the data on that is very clear. And I think for the younger people, it's especially good because by volunteering and experimenting, which is what I did, they discover their talents and their gifts, and they realize that they have a calling.
Stephen, most of our audience is older professionals, so
Mhm.
experienced professionals, and they may see, your path as being a lucky one because you found your calling very early on in life. And even with the ups and downs, you were able to pursue it consistently. Many of my clients, who are a small percentage, but still a significant percentage of my audience, struggle later in life with the situation of having pursued a profession that was not their calling.
Right.
So, do you have any advice to give professionals who have found their calling later in life or are even unsure if they have a calling at all?
Well, first of all, as a point of faith, I think everybody has a calling and sometimes callings. As a teacher, if I say no to the curiosity and creativity of a student, I feel I should quit teaching, more or
Mhm.
less, because that's a bad sign. You never say no without a yes. That's a good management strategy. That's how I operate centers and departments and divisions and so forth. I have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of people who work with me. So you never want to say a no without a yes. And that's just a general rule of life. Because when you say no and that's all you say, it's humiliating. Sometimes I go out on the streets in New York and I will tell a young person, do you know that you are a wonder of creation and a miracle of the universe? And they look at me like I'm very strange, which I suppose I am in certain respects. But I say that because I want to shake them up. People have been telling them for years that they have no gifts, no talents. And that is both humiliating, but also it strips them of their dignity. And so everybody, no matter what their stage in life, goes through these periods. I'm sure you're aware of Thomas Edison, who came up with the light bulb. He was fairly young when he was humiliated. He was thrown out of his school in Milan, Ohio, which is where he was from and was born on a farm. His teachers threw him out of school because they didn't think that he had a mind that was good for anything. So he went home to his farm, and his mother, who was the heroine of this story, she told him that he could tinker in the barn and that maybe one day he could be a light to the world. And of course, he was.
Yeah.
I visited that farm because I lived in Cleveland for many years and it was just a little bit outside of the city. And it's a beautiful story. No matter what age you are, whether you're in midlife or whatever, you can find beautiful things to do. I've known many people who saw their professional careers come to a close, but it worked out fairly well for them. In Canada, in Calgary, Canada, we had a program where older employees, let's just say in their late 50s, would, for the last 5 years on the job, be allowed to take a day off a week and volunteer for something that they found particularly meaningful. And our studies on that indicated that it freed them of any kind of depression and suicidality, because that does happen.
Hmm.
By giving them an opportunity to discover sources of meaning beyond the structure of their corporation or whatever their workplace may be, and to let them gradually find that value in activities that are beyond what they had normally been involved in, they had very fulfilling transitions and oftentimes went on to do wonderful things. I think part of the problem is that people make the mistake of thinking that if their career runs into a wall, that their goal is to find almost the same kind of career, except in a little different venue. I don't think that's very productive. I think the best thing to do is to really do something creative and new. I know that if I lost my job, I've been teaching in medical schools for 40 some odd years, but if I lost my job, I'd probably go back to Mesopotamia, Ohio, that is, to Hopewell. Hopewell, for people who want to Google it, it's a 350-acre farm that was owned by the Amish once upon a time until it was purchased by a very wealthy woman who converted it into a therapeutic farm community for people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. I won't go into the details, but it's the most successful and innovative program in the world. And there are now almost 100 that are modeled identically after it. And what you do at Hopewell is you volunteer, you've got pro-social activities, you're baling the hay, you're combing the horses, you're going out and getting the eggs out of the chicken coop. You're you're doing wonderful things every day. You're also
Yeah.
meeting together in small groups and discussing positive psychological themes like gratitude, happiness, kindness, and so forth. The essences of positive psychology. And you're not on the internet. You're not doing AI. There's a wonderful psychiatrist at the University of California, San Francisco, who has developed the idea and shown it to be a big problem with youth of AI psychosis. There's 17 American adolescents with no history of mental illness, and they're now dead because the AI doesn't really teach them that they're lovable. It's a machine. So it has its limitations. And it can ask them, it can query them. So what's bothering you? I lost my job or I can't get started or whatever it might be. But instead of guiding them toward a productive path, it actually guides them into a sort of negative vortex of depression and self destruction.
Mm.
So I think part of the problem is that we've forgotten how to relate to one another. Our social skills are not what they should be, at least in many cases. And I think this is a real problem. We don't really have much community, at least in America these days. I don't know how Melbourne is. Melbourne's a pretty nice place. Uh, but we have these problems of uh, finding meaningful community. And I think that
Yeah.
that comes first. I don't think people should be looking for a job per se. I think they should be looking to use their talents in the service of an identifiable constituency, and the job will come.
Mm.
If it doesn't come, they will create it.
That's a great way to explain the sort of coaching that I do. Thank you, Stephen. I may
Sure.
have to add that quote to my website. Look, I've been researching you and I saw your book Pure Unlimited Love, and in the book you propose these 7 paths to reach pure unlimited love.
And inner peace.
Yes. What does it mean to have pure unlimited love and inner peace?
Well, first of all, you could ask, what is love? And
Yes, please.
I already tried to give you a simple definition of what
Hmm.
basically we're talking about here when the security and well-being of another is as meaningful or real to you as your own, sometimes more so, you love that person. Now, there's no Greek, there's no Latin, there are no wonderful ancient Eastern languages involved in that. It's commonsensical. You could be in downtown Melbourne and be talking with an old friend in a coffee shop who's had some hard times. You could be listening to them. That would be an expression of love. Maybe they've lost a loved one, so you could express compassion. Maybe they're bogged down in their creativity, and so you could help them with that. You've got to look at every situation every day, whether you're in workplaces or at home or just out on the street. And you've always got to be asking yourself, how can I manifest love as this particular person needs it?
Hmm.
So that's important. Forgiveness. I run into physicians who sometimes are responsible because they all make medical mistakes for the death of a patient. And what I like to say to them quietly and with compassion, those who make no mistakes make nothing. That's a quote from Martin Luther King. And it's a good rule of love and of life. And so you're always trying to expand the canvas. So there are these difficult moments. It's like for those of you who are aware of him, Jackson Pollock, the painter, he would put a block full of yucky paint on the floor and it didn't look like anything attractive. But by the time he covered it up with beautiful colored lines, it was museum worthy. So you always want to expand the canvas. And if you lose a job, if you're looking for something meaningful in life, it's always there. You just have to expand the canvas. And
Yeah.
I've had those experiences a few times. I've had to change
Mm.
jobs occasionally. I've always tried to be conservative and make sure that I had a new job lined up before I quit my old job. I quit a job in Cleveland where I was very happy, but the
Hmm.
economy wasn't working too well for me, and I wasn't getting the kind of support and freedom that I needed. So I left a particular medical school in Cleveland and I came here to Stony Brook, and I've been here for 17 years.
Hmm.
It wasn't easy at the start. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but as it turns out, There are good people everywhere, and I've been able to flourish here at Stony Brook, which is about an hour outside of New York on the North Shore of Long Island.
Yeah.
So I'm one who really believes that you have to just be enterprising, creative, and loving
Mm.
and free. And if you get an opportunity in life to break out of a job that honestly you didn't care much for anyway, although maybe you did, that's not a bad thing. It can work to your advantage. We had a guy here, he's now passed away, named Jim Simons. And you might know his name because he was the first quantitative investor in the world. He was a graduate of MIT and Princeton, and he was here only because he lost a job after he got done with his doctorate. He got a job with the CIA in Boston, code busting, and they caught him protesting the Vietnam War out on Commonwealth Avenue, and they fired him on the spot. And as a result, they were looking for a math department chairman here at Stony Brook. It was a new university at the time. Now it's a leading university, but at the time it was just a mud hole. And they'd offered the job to four previous people, and they'd all turned it down. And he came here and he said, "Well, I've been fired and I need a job." So he took the job, and in 10 years, it was the number two rated math department in the country, number four in the world. He himself won all the major medals in mathematics. He hired five or six brilliant people, and then he lost his job. But he always said about getting fired in Boston, everybody should get fired once. And they should. I was fired once upon a time in high school from a job in a shipyard because I sanded down the transom of a big, beautiful boat, of a power boat that had all kinds of gold inlay, and people had been working on it for weeks and weeks. But the boss said, "Take that down." And I took it down to the wood, and I was fired on the spot. But it was great for me because I realized that I could find other things to do and be
Mm.
resourceful. And I found a job tutoring, which was a wonderful thing. So I don't have any problem. I think it's okay to lose a job once. Maybe twice is a lot, three times, four times. That's maybe over the top. But everybody should get fired once. I really believe that.
Stephen, I've been thinking about what you're saying and thinking about the amount of volunteering I did this year. Probably the most volunteering I've ever done this year has been really heavy on the pro bono and volunteering work that I have done because there has been so many big layoffs that were done one after the other with organizations that were not really proper client. They would never be clients of mine. So for example, United Nations and WHO, I think there were about 14,000 people that had to leave because of lack of funding all of a sudden, very suddenly. I mean, people saw it coming, I suppose, but they didn't expect it to get this bad. So these are people that work and live in Africa, in the Middle East, in countries where I usually don't have clients and they can't afford me. And I volunteered to help UNHCR and UN and WHO with support for the people that were leaving. It takes a toll on me. I love it. I do it gladly. You don't have to ask me twice. I will always sign up for these sort of opportunities to share my expertise, and I do it freely. I don't mind. But is there a limit where I need to be careful
Mhm.
so that I can protect my own well-being? Because I have sometimes felt depleted during this year, and I am wondering here if I've done too much.
Well, you don't want to let yourself feel depleted.
Yeah.
Remember, definition of love: the well being and security of another becomes as meaningful or as real to you as your own. There's still a you. And here, working in a big medical center, I've known some great professionals who've devoted their lives to the care of patients for many, many years. and they begin to start running on empty. They lose the meaning. And that's a very serious problem. And so you can say, on the one hand, well, be mindful, meditate, balance your life. But sometimes the system itself, to be frank, puts so much pressure on them that it's not that they're burned out, they're suffering kind of moral injury because they can't practice with the sort of care and compassion that they want to practice with. So I would say that there are limits. No human being is unlimited. And we have to be stewards of our energy and our creativity and utilize our energies to the extent that it's possible for us to be thriving. Now, there are times when sacrifice is inevitable, and that can be challenging, and it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, but you don't want to overdo it. So I believe in balance and try to pursue that. I write a lot about volunteering. I've written whole books about it. And I don't like to think that that gets in the hands of somebody who is already serving others as a nurse or a social worker or a physician because they're doing that anyway on a professional day to day basis. But I mainly think about volunteering for folks who don't have that level of meaning in their lives, for, the noble bus driver or the taxi cab driver or the guy who cleans up the park. They need opportunities, pro social opportunities, to do things that are very meaningful for them because they don't have that opportunity in day to day life.
Mm,
So I think you have to look at who the person is. It's not how much you do, that's important. Our studies show that it's really not a matter of volunteering hours and hours. It's really that 2 to 3 hours a week that seems to create a kind of shift effect. And by the way, for young
mm,
kids, for teenagers, it's probably an hour or two. For older adults, it's probably 3 or 4 hours. So there
mm.
are some differences in the prescription, and that's important to note. Now, as you realize from the first chapter of my book, it's kind giving, kind volunteering. May you give and glow. So it's not as though it's just an external action. That can get very dreary. It's not as though
Mm,
it's coerced and imposed upon you. That can be very dreary. Service based learning is required in some of the schools, and about a third of people take to it like a duck to water, and about a third of people need a lot of mentoring, and eventually they catch on, they hear the music, and there's about a third of people who just don't quite get it, maybe until they have a midlife crisis.
yeah.
Um, and so there are differences
Mm,
in all of this. I generally don't want anybody to overdo volunteering, and how it's managed, excuse me, is very important.
yeah. I love the statements in your book, May You Give and Glow. The other one that I really liked was May You Heal in Kindness. I think this is such a good one for me as a coach to use with my clients because when you are laid off, when you lose your job, when you get fired, something happens, or you don't like your boss and you're very upset at work, you go through a grieving process. And we talk a lot about the 7 stages of grief and how they're not linear. But I love the May You Heal in Kindness, where there's this. I mean, I would love for you to maybe explain it better than I am here, but I think one of the stages of grief that can happen if you're laid off is you get really angry. So, what would you say about that?
To heal with kindness is something that we can all do. It's not just for healthcare people or pastors or counselors. Healing with kindness is for everybody without exception. So, how we use our voices, the tone of our voices, our ability to respond to adversity and not react to it, but that takes spiritual discipline. So, you cannot get away from spirituality. I get up, as you know from reading the book, I get up in the morning about 5 o'clock. I was up at 5 o'clock this morning. What time is it now? It's about midnight East Coast time. That's why I yawned a couple of times. Forgive me. But, I get up early every morning and I meditate. I'm mindful and I do that for half an hour. And then I envision in some detail the people I know I'm going to encounter over the course of the day. And I ask myself, what expression of love do they need from me? And so I mentioned carefrontation before. That means that there are some people who have sort of gotten off line and they've forgotten really who and whose they are. And so I want to be the one who can remind them in a very caring way to kind of keep on track. That's what
Mm,
Aristotle said defines the highest level of friendship. It's not who you
mm,
party with or who you hang out with, but it's who you can help maintain their inner core. So carefrontation. Sometimes it's loyalty. Sometimes you'll run into sign. I can know that somebody's lost a spouse,
mhm,
run off in some irresponsible way. And so I want to be assuring them that they'll get loyalty from me and from the people in my programs because I teach loyalty and I teach compassion. I want everybody to be compassionate. I don't want any of this rough stuff or this callousness. So that's leadership. And for a lot of people, when they find they have a boss who doesn't care about these things, well, maybe there's not too much you can do about that. But if you ever have an opportunity yourself for leadership, don't imitate those bad role models. Do the opposite.
Stephen, you're a scholar and you wake up at 5 a.m. Do you think I'm very particular about a daily schedule? Because if I'm working with professionals that are unemployed, they usually fall off the wagon by not having a schedule. You don't have to go to work, then you start becoming, more and more undisciplined with your life, and that can affect the outcome of your job search. So I'm very strict with what I call an optimized job search schedule. And my clients love it. So I'm very proud of having developed it. But I'm interested in your views about the waking up at 5 a.m. time because I know that there's some controversies there. Is this something that suits you, or is this research that you're applying to yourself?
Well, it has a long history. The ancient rabbis always said that the early morning was the time to meditate and envision your day because when you get up out of bed, you're not really conscious of time or even place. You could be in Melbourne, but you could be in Sydney or Brisbane too. You have to kind of orient yourself. It's also a time when human nature at its worst has not yet expressed itself. So I like the early mornings. So do the Hindus and people from most of the great traditions. Doesn't mean that during the course of the day you can't refresh yourself. But I'm a believer in the early morning as a time of purity. And for the ancient rabbis, and for anyone who reads the Upanishads, it's the early morning when you can get closer to the supreme being, to that ultimate energy and reality, because you feel beyond time and place. And that's the same as the supreme being, as at least it's described. And so that's important to me. Now, does that fit for everybody? I'm not sure. I can't testify to that, but it works for me. And I've been doing
Mm.
it since I was 15, which is a long time. I won't tell you quite
A
how long.
very long time. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, which is in your book as well, is this relationship that we can have with nature.
Mhm.
Right? This is something else that I think is really important for job seekers because usually what happens these days, if you lose your job, the first thing you do is you sit in front of a computer and you doom scroll job marketplaces like LinkedIn or Indeed, and you get addicted to those platforms. And when you look outside, it's already dark.
Yeah.
And I think nature is such an important part of the optimization of your daily routine. How do you think we can best do this
Mhm.
when we're so anxious about finding a job quickly?
Well, there can be financial pressures, but in general terms, you want to cherish nature. So that's the sixth way. May you cherish the gift of nature. And you want to do that while you're working, while you're employed. I ride a ferry across Long Island Sound, which is part of the ocean, to Bridgeport, Connecticut at least every couple of weeks. And I don't get off the boat, I just stay on. It costs me 20 American dollars. I don't know what that is Australian now. But I go back and forth because I love the waves. I like to see the seagulls. I just like the feel of the water. And I can see the coastline and all the beautiful fall leaves, which are not quite off the trees yet. So I really believe that we are necessarily creatures of nature. And I don't know how Melbourne is doing these days, but we have a little town nearby called Port Jefferson, from which the ferry goes over to Bridgeport. It's 20 bucks. It's really nothing. But I go there and there's a meditational center and you've got wind chimes making beautiful sounds. You've got water flowing through a bamboo tube and into a little pond. Maybe you have a small statue of St. Francis of Assisi. You've got lots of beautiful plants. And that's so important in life, even in assisted living centers and nursing homes for older adults now. You have whole wings of those structures that are devoted to nature. And everybody realizes from very significant studies at Harvard and elsewhere that you want to have what we now call here the Eden alternative. Have some nice, friendly Labradors floating around and let people be looking after those Labradors. Let somebody be watching watering the plants. So doing things that are pro-social and naturalistic, that's very, very important for people at any point in their lives. And so you should never stop that. It doesn't matter whether you're searching for a job or you have a job or you never had a job or you may never get a job. You need to be cherishing nature. There are books now being written called Nature Deficit Disorder. I go to the
Wow.
psychiatric emergency unit here about every several weeks just to see how bad things can get. And I have to tell you that it's horrendous. And most of these people, especially the younger ones, are just so hooked up on the internet all the time that they've lost any kind of balance or proportion in life. So, right here, I keep handy, I'll show this to your audience, a nice book with some Australian writers called Eco Psychology. That's important. I have to get out to nature, and I've always been that way. I remember with my kids who are now grown up, we would be driving from Cleveland to New York, and I would be getting so excited about the cow or the horse along the side of the road. And my kids would look at me like I was nuts because they don't have that necessarily. And it's a very sad state of affairs. So I think we need to take nature very seriously because spirituality, may you know the one mind, may you cherish nature, these things are very closely connected. And I'd like to see more of that connection manifest in people's lives. I went to school at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and Steve Jobs slept on my floor. A young Steve Jobs. And he loved nature. He would disappear from Friday to Monday to the apple orchards north of Portland, Oregon. And there were no machines to pick apples back then. It was hand picking. And he would come back to campus with a wonderful bag full of apples and a pocket full of money. And we all loved the guy. And we read the autobiography of a yogi on my floor. And when he died, everybody who went to the funeral got a paperback copy of that great classic book.
Oh, wow.
So the cover of his iPhone was the cover of that book. So he understood from the get-go that nature and spirituality are interconnected. He never let his daughter go near one of those white plastic devices that he later developed until she was college age because he didn't want to ruin her life. So, when I see the way people are growing up now with these devices everywhere, I don't think it's a good thing. I feel very badly about artificial intelligence. I actually know the guy who got the Nobel Prize for developing AI when he was with Google, and he quit Google. And now he's a professor, a general professor at the University of Toronto. His name is Hansen. Great guy. And the reason he quit Google is because he could see no way that we mere human beings could ever really thrive and flourish in a world dominated by technology. And so that's part of the problem, is that if people don't get freed up from that and really interact socially and meaningfully and really interact, I mean, in their embodiment, I'm not sure it matters if they have a job or not.
Yeah. Stephen, this is such a wonderful conversation for my audience. The fact that it's also December, I think it means a lot to finish the year with these messages and these reminders of love, of nature, of purpose, of empathy and compassion. It's such a good time. Is there anything that you would like to speak directly to my listener? If there's there anything that we maybe didn't discuss today that you want to finish off with?
Well, what is happiness? There's a terrible guy whose name will not be mentioned. He's a Harvard professor. And he wrote a book called Stumbling on Happiness. And he thinks of happiness purely in hedonic terms. It's all a matter of hedonic pleasure. But really, the father of happiness studies, Marty Seligman, was a longtime friend of mine. He says, yeah, the hedonic side of happiness is a small part of it. You do want, let's acknowledge this, you do want a plate of food on the table from time to time. Hopefully not too much. You don't need to be obese. You want a roof over your head. And maybe you have some other desires that are important for you, for your family. But that's a small part of happiness. The larger part of happiness is what my professor at the University of Chicago, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, called flow. And that became a huge international success, his book and his movement.
I love that book. I'm looking at the book because I'm talking to you. It's right here.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you're really
Mm.
engaged with what you're doing, and that's what everybody wants to have, that's more important than anything else in terms of your work life, if you will. You're not just fitting in, but you're really doing something that makes you better at being who you are. And when you're in the flow state, whether you're a writer or a teacher or whatever you might be, a musician, cleaning the parks, driving a bus, you can find what makes you flow. And when you're in the flow state, you lose sense of time and place. It's very mystical, actually. That's why Csikszentmihalyi taught in the divinity school at the University of Chicago, as well as in the psychology department. because he was very into the Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and such things. And so I think it's very important to be able to get into the time of flow on a daily basis. And ideally, if you can flow at work, then you blur the line between work and play. And blurring that line is the secret to a long term success. I have to confess, if I may, that every once in a while, even I say to myself, thank God it's Friday. But that's a bad sign.
Mm.
I don't do that much. I've done it a few times, especially in the last couple of years. Maybe it means I'm destined for something more, next step. But I, I've, as far as I can recount, I've always had a joy in coming to work. Now, I've had a certain amount of autonomy because I have had to move jobs from Case Western Medical School, which I loved very much, but I didn't see the opportunities for leadership to develop the kind of programs that I have now. I mean, I have now the number 7 ranked program in American medical education, and it's a center for medical humanities, compassionate care, and bioethics. It's all about compassionate care and teaching empathy to these young, wonderful students. And I couldn't do that where I was. So I had to move on, and it was painful to move on. And it took me a couple of years to get over it. I think I had separation anxiety. I knew I wasn't in Cleveland anymore. So, there is separation anxiety, and people are going to feel that. And there's nothing like having to move jobs and oftentimes move locations and even cities and counties and whatever. That's part of it. But you also have to be resilient and have post traumatic growth. There's a lot of trauma in losing a job or quitting a job. I didn't so much lose the job in Cleveland at Case Western, but I quit the job because I knew I could never do what I was really called to do. And so I came here. I ran into a university president who wanted someone in the world to come to Stony Brook and teach kindness and compassion and empathy. And we've had great programs, great success. We've won national awards in this area. So the move was tough, tough as nails. But I always had my eyes on something. And so the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. When you
Mm.
lose a job, that's exactly what you need to be thinking. And then, of course, the third level of happiness for Marty Seligman is more over the course of a lifetime. You get to a point where you kind of look back. I'm doing a little bit of that now, and you feel that what you did was meaningful, that it was pretty good on the whole, that you contributed to the well-being of identifiable constituencies, family and others, and that's important. So I think we have to really reflect on what happiness is and don't give in to some of these really foolish pseudo scholars, social scientists for the most part, who think they know what happiness is, but they don't.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you so much. I think we got into a flow here.
Okay.
And we could have gone on forever, but it was great to speak to you. And there's so much. I want my audience to be like a sponge, absorbing everything that you said today, and that carries them on to 2026 with more of a purposeful, intentional plan for their careers. So thank you so much for speaking to us today. I really appreciate you being here today with us.
Well, it's a pleasure. And this book, Pure Unlimited Love, with a forward by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it can do some
What a
good.
treasure.
It's
That's
very
amazing.
practical. That's actually the last forward that he will have written because he's now 90 to 91 and he's not doing
Yes.
that for anybody anymore. But
That's
fortunately,
amazing, Stephen.
he came around and he was willing to do this for me. It's a beautiful
Awesome.
forward. So I'm glad of that.
Beautiful. We're going to have a link to it in the episode show notes, a link to your website and to the book. So anybody listening, they can go and purchase the book. That would be a wonderful Christmas present. All right, Stephen. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
I'll see you. Take care.